Okay, quite a few of you asked about natural selection and how it crucially relates to these three things here. What a selection pressure is, and there's an issue because this says selection and this says selection. So natural selection can be subdivided into other types of selection. And what do we mean by pressure? Okay, so I'll go through that. What do we mean by normal distribution? So we'll zip through that. And then what types of selection are there? So I've got selection, 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 natural selection, selection pressures, and types of selection. No wonder it gets confused. Okay, so we're going to look at an example of beak depth. Again, they like this one because Darwin measured this when he was on his beagle exploration of the Galapagos. So here's a bird. All we're going to do is measure its beak depth. Okay, so you have to use adult birds so that age of bird doesn't affect it. You might even have to just do males and not females, so you have to match the sex potentially. But they're going to put up some mist nets, capture birds, and then they're going to measure their beak depth. Okay, so if we did that, and if we measure anything like that, where I'm getting a ruler out, then we get data that looks like this generally. Okay, just the same as if we measured, the height of all male sixth formers, we get a distribution curve where on the x-axis is the range in the phenotype. So our phenotype, the observed characteristic, is beak depth, and these are small beak depths, these are large beak depths, these are middle-ish beak depths. Okay, and this is the frequency in the population. So I'm going to measure 1,000 birds, and this is, there was only 7 that had a small beak depth. Again, I haven't put any numbers on here, but yeah, if you measure things like that, you tend to get a normal distribution curve. Okay, so and I know that this is a normal distribution curve because it's symmetrical about the mean. So this value here, if I come down from the peak to here, this is the mean. So the median, if I kind of work my way to the center in all the data, it's the middle beak depth as well, and it's the most common, hence it's the mode. And if these three things are equal, it means that we've got a bell-shaped curve called a normal distribution curve. So this is just our normal distribution curve. Yeah, it must be symmetrical. Okay, and all we're going to do is look at what's the effect in year 1. So we'll gather data and we plot it, and then we come back in 15 years and we see and we do the same survey again, and we look to see what's changed, because numerous things can happen, and they'll have to give you in a question. They'll have to give you more information. So I've given you some more information here. So here I've got beak shape. So these are, if you can be pointy, or you can be less pointy and broader, or you can be really broad. Okay, and there's a range, all the range in between. There's a variation in beak depth, and that's due to mutation. There's a beak depth gene that has got numerous alleles of it because mutations have given different alleles of that gene. Okay, and you can imagine if you've got a small beak, you're better at small seeds. You can manipulate them better. So yeah, I've put it suited for seed size, small, medium, and large. And the small seeds, they come from vines. Okay, whereas the bigger seeds come from grasses, and the large seeds come from the cactus or cacti, if I'm going plural. Vines, grasses, cacti. Now vines like wet abiotic conditions. Okay, grasses like it variable, a dry spell, a wet spell, a dry spell, a wet spell, and cacti, obviously, they are well adapted for dry conditions. So if this imaginary island where this population of birds live, if it was, had 15 years of just variable weather conditions, well, that's not going to suit the vines. It's not going to suit the cacti. Okay, so if that happened, so we had years and years and years of just, like it is in the UK, a bit dry, a bit wet, a bit wet, a bit dry, a bit wet. Well, that would mean that these ones that have got small beaks wouldn't have small seeds, so they'd have a disadvantage. These with big beaks, well, there won't be many cacti around, so they'd have a disadvantage. The best beak to be is to be in the middle. So, and if we did that, then over time we get a change in the distribution curve. So we're effectively selecting against the small and the large. Okay, and therefore I get a different change. Okay, there's been no change in mean. The mean's the same. The standard deviation, you can see it's got smaller, as in most of them are now close to the mean, has reduced. So mathematically, you can tell if it's, so yes, and this is called stabilizing selection. So it's natural, so it's a form of natural selection, but it stabilizes the population at a mean value. So there's no change in the mean, but the standard deviation is reduced. When I sample it 15 years later, oh, all these birds now have got very similar beaks. Make sense? That's stabilizing selection. The selection pressure was the availability of food. However, let's go for the next 15 years. Let's assume that there's a massive drought. Okay, so a drought that lasts for years. That can happen with all these like El Nino effects and things like that. So if that was the case, then we're going to lose our small seeds, the vines that like it wet, and we're going to lose our grasses that like variable conditions. So only cacti are going to survive. So therefore, only these here, these with the larger beaks, they're going to have the advantage. Okay, so in effect, we are selecting against smaller beaks, and we will drive the curve the other way. So it's going to move over, so it's going to move over here. Okay, so it's moved that way. And this is because it's moved away from the mean, it's called directional selection. Again, it's still a form of natural selection because it's just nature determining it. This is where there's a change in the mean. And it moves away from the pressure. And the selection pressure is basically death. Those that die, the mean moves away from it. Okay, and generally the standard deviation stays roughly constant. SD stays roughly constant. I know on my diagram, my curve's gone slightly broader, therefore signifying a larger standard deviation. Roughly the same. When I'm comparing it to the black line, the maximum frequency is less now as well for some reason, just because of my drawing. So yeah, there's two types of natural selection: stabilizing and directional. In year 13, we also bring in disruptive, but we do about that when we do about speciation. Okay, so if I was teaching this, I always have my acronym VIBE. I've done that far too small, it's never going to fit there. VIBE. And all I was say, if it says the question was explain how the finches evolved bigger beaks, I'd say there is so there's variation in beak depth due to mutation. Must mention mutation. So that's V stands for variation. I stands for intraspecific competition. That means competition within the species. Intraspecific competition. Interspecific competition is competition between species, like a leopard and a tiger. Do they live in the same place? Anyway, fighting for the same food. So here, this is where we can't be vague. I can't just say the best adapted survive. I need to say, those with a bigger beak can access more food. Therefore, yeah. So, those with bigger beaks can access more food. therefore breed, that's what B stands for, and pass on their allele for large beak to their offspring. Crucially, I have to mention mutation here. I have to talk about how it relates to it. I can't just be vague for I. Breeding, I need to say breed, allele, offspring. All three need to be mentioned to get the breeding mark. And then E just stands for evolution. And evolution is, I've run out of space, pop it here. Therefore, there will be a increase. Well, should I say there is an increase in the large beak allele in the population. And crucially, I have to say increase and allele and population. An individual bird cannot change its beak. If you just happen to have a small beak and the seeds are big, it can't just grow a bigger beak. This one just dies. This one dies. This one survives. It passes on its alleles for big beaks. Then it dies. But its offspring have got the big beak allele, and if conditions on the island stay nice and dry, then they're going to have the advantage. Okay, and in the Galapagos, there's different islands with different climates, and therefore there's different finch distributions. So just going back to the start, just quickly, because I think I'm approaching my 15 minutes maximum. We're thinking of concentration time. So in terms of these three words, selection, pressure, that's just, it's the I of vibe. It's just, what is causing the things to change? And it tends to be either food or not becoming food. So mainly kind of camouflage. I pronounce that camouflage so I don't forget the camouflage U. And it also might be like sex attraction, if you like a male peacock. Well, a peacock, not a peahen. So it's anything that's picking who's going to survive or die. Okay, so that's what a pressure is. Normal distribution is just if you measure any kind of phenotype that's measurable in terms of like using a ruler or scales. So if it's a continuous variable, then you get normal distribution data. If you don't, then you'd be scratching your head to think why. There's obviously something's going on if it's not normally distributed, but you'd expect it to be. And the types of selection, this is where people get confused because there's natural selection, there's artificial selection, but both of those can be subdivided into directional selection or stabilizing selection, or as you'll see in year 13, and you may have mentioned it a bit anyway, disruptive selection. Okay, and all of those can be described mathematically because in one the mean changes, in the other the mean doesn't change, and standard deviation gets smaller for stabilizing selection, and you'd expect it to be roughly the same for directional. Okay, I'll stop there. 30 minutes 43.